When I first started my Linux journey, I was on a tiling window manager, i3WM. From there, I used tiler after tiler after tiler. When I went to Wayland, I was using SwayWM, which is basically i3, and then Hyperland, and nowadays, I'm making use of Neri, a scrolling tiling window manager, but at its core, it's still a tiling window manager. If it wasn't obvious, I do like the tiling model. I like modifications on the tiling model, but I do still like tiling. But there was a period I wasn't using tiler, the thing I used directly before Neri, the thing I used for actually quite a while. Ever since the launch of the 6.0 version, KDE Plasma. When 6.0 came out, I was curious, why do people like desktop environments? What is it that people like about KDE? So I went and tried it. And someone in my livestream chat reminded me that I never made a retrospective on my time on KDE. So that's what this is. And for the sake of the video, I'm going to record this on KDE Plasma. For the most part, you're not going to see my face, so it doesn't really matter, but I'm here anyway. So let's start with the positives, which is mostly what I had. If it wasn't a positive experience, I wouldn't have stuck with it for as long as I did. I didn't leave KDE because I thought it was bad, because I didn't like the experience. I left it because I wanted to try out Neri. I liked Neri, I stuck with Neri, and that's what I daily drive still. So if you've been anywhere near KDE, and I've got a separate video coming out about specifically this topic, you've probably heard that it's buggy. And it's not without bugs, right? Like, no software is without bugs, especially if you're dealing with NVIDIA GPUs, especially if you're dealing with older NVIDIA drivers. Understandable, especially if you're running an older version of Plasma where a lot of those problems haven't been addressed. In my case, though, it was an absolutely rock-solid environment. The only crashes that I can really distinctly remember were crashes that were so bad, caused by software that was so broken, that it basically took down my entire system. The example that comes to mind is the Monster Hunter Wilds beta crashing my GPU drivers. Now, this wasn't even just a Linux problem. This was happening over on Windows as well. This is how broken that game was, and in many ways still is. I also want to talk a bit about design, because I never really heavily riced Plasma. This is just Breeze Dark. I changed the default font. I changed my accent color, and that's basically it in the way of actually customizing the look. I'm no designer, but you don't have to be a mechanic to know if your car is broken, and you don't have to be a designer to know if you don't like a design. And frankly, I just don't really get what people say when they say it looks old and outdated in a lot of cases. I hear the words they're saying, and I see how they get to the conclusion. I just disagree with the conclusion. To me, Plasma doesn't look old. I don't have an issue with the dark theme, I don't have an issue with the light theme. I prefer the dark theme because I just generally prefer dark themes, but when I look at this, to me it feels more like a polished, classic computing experience. Yes, this is not following the most recent design trends where everything has to be rounded, everything has to be bubbly, there has to be no information density, everything has to be super spread apart and really annoying to use. But if you said, hey, let's take the Windows XP, the Windows 7 experience, and then bring that experience into 2025, keep going down that design path, continue improving upon it, modernizing it, and smoothing it out, that is what you get. This right here is what you get from that. And for me, that's exactly what I'm looking for from a computer. I've heard complaints about the icon set, the default font, things like that, and frankly, I don't have anything to say about it, really. Like, it looks totally fine to me. The icons don't offend me in any way. They're not, like, horribly bad. It's not mixing and matching 20 different styles. Like, I just don't understand the complaints that people make about the design. To me, Like, it looks good. Now, during my time on Plasma, I wasn't much in the way of installing plugins, but coming from the smaller tilers, i3 obviously is the exception because there's a lot of work done on that, but a lot of random smaller tilers, there's not really much in the way of plugins. Plasma, though, it's nowhere near as much as GNOME, right? Like, GNOME has so many plugins, but there's still a lot for Plasma, and a lot of them are kind of pointless. You don't really care about them. But others can be incredibly useful. Basically, all I have is like a modification to my workspace display. And I had one for changing the focus and the header of Windows, but due to an update, it ended up breaking. And that was pretty much it. But if I wanted to install a bunch of stuff, like, you know, if I want to turn it into a tiler, Cronkite exists nowadays. It's not perfect. It was broken for a long time, and there's other plugins that exist, but I like to have the option just to have plugins, even if I don't use them. It's nice to be in an environment that has a lot of people using it, because when you have a lot of people using something, there is a lot of support for it. And if there's something I'm maybe not sure about, it's very likely someone has already asked that question, whether it's a forum post or a Reddit post or made a video about it or something like that, and I don't have to necessarily dig through documentation to find an answer to it, because so many other people have probably looked at the same problem. On the note of trying to do things and find answers for them, I installed Plasma on Arch, as you might expect. I am an Arch Linux user, by the way. And on Arch, we have the option of doing a minimal Plasma installation where instead of installing the entire KDE suite, it is just installing the desktop and the minimal dependencies. This caused issues that I'll talk about a bit later, but the good side of this is that I don't actually care about most of the Plasma suite. I'm, coming from that tiling background where you piece your environment together in the way that you want it to be. If you want to use random tools from other places, you can go and do that. And I don't want to use certain things in Plasma. Great example. I don't really care about the launcher, the crunner thing. I just disabled that. I don't usually use the menu down here except to quit out of Plasma, so I disabled the super key to go and open that. And, if I don't have certain devices that can be controlled by Plasma, I don't really care to have those dependencies around as something that it just pulls in. When you hear people say that Plasma has a lot of dependencies and installing a KDE application pulls in most of the KDE desktop, this is true, but only because GNOME does it in a very different way. GNOME tends to bundle up all of their dependencies into a really big bundle. So if you install one GNOME application, you might get way less in the number of packages, but overall functionality-wise, overall code-wise, even though KDE looks like it's installing more things, it ends up actually being about the same. It's just KDE likes to split everything out into these little individual packages, and GNOME bundles everything. Now, with the exception of Hyperland, coming from a tiler, you don't really get much in the way of first-party tooling. And while I don't necessarily want to use all of it, it is nice to have the option of a file manager that is directly from the project, and all of these other little things that are directly from the project, where if I want to have that proper KDE experience, I want to have something where I know it's going to integrate nicely into the environment, and when there are issues specifically within KDE, the people making that application are going to care about those problems because its main focus, the main reason it exists, is operating in this environment. When you run some third-party solution for whatever it ends up being, and you have issues in one specific environment, the devs don't necessarily care about that environment. They're not going to give the same level of focus as something specifically made for it. You sort of have an additional level of quality assurance that you just don't really get with cobbling together random applications in a way that seems to mostly work, but It works on your system. Does it work for anyone else? Does it work on anyone else's system? Nobody will know. But when you install a desktop environment like KDE, you know that the applications in KDE are supposed to work in KDE. In the same vein, it's really nice to know exactly where to go to configure everything in the environment, because on a tiler, you configure the tiler in the tiling config, and you configure some other random application in that config, and then another config, and another config, and another config. But if you're using the applications from KDE, I can just go into the settings menu, and all of the settings are going to be here. And if it's not in here, all of the config files are going to be named in a way that makes it obvious they are related to the KDE environment. Rather than just being like, okay, wait, what bar was I using? I've got like 4 bar configs sitting around because I'm like trying out different bars. Okay, wait, it's actually this bar. Okay, which file manager config is it? Like, if you remember exactly what you're using, and for like visual things, it's fairly easy to remember, but especially with like random background things like your notification daemon, right? Especially if you've tried out a bunch of them, it can be easy to forget exactly which one you're currently using. But if it's something like KDE, well, you're most likely using the one actually in KDE. And random other things like, how do I set a global Qt theme? I still don't know how to work that out outside of something like KDE. How do I set a keyboard layout? That is something you can easily do. It's just, if you don't know how to mess with keyboard layouts like that can very quickly go badly. Here though, like if you want to change it, like you just find the keyboard settings and change it in the keyboard settings. And I know for some people they find KDE to be very cluttered and very confusing, and there's a lot of buttons and toggles and all that, but coming from a tiler where, everything is an option in a config file, right? Like, I find having the buttons there not any more cluttered than a 1,000-line config file where everything is just a wall of text, right? If you get used to that, going from that to buttons it's about the same in the level of clutter. Now, there are some systems kind of unique to KDE, which I really like. It's not something where I can't live without it, but I do still really like them. One of those is the widget system. So this widget is the same sort of widget that you could place down here in the bar. And we can just put those wherever I want to. If I wanted to have a clock like here and like do that, I can do that. And I know I've spoken to KDE devs and they're like, I don't know why, you like the widgets so much, because it's something where they have it, but it's not like a big focus, a big attention. But maybe it's just the fact that my first home PC was a Vista system. So a part of me really likes the idea of being able to just place widgets around. Even though I haven't used Vista in a long time, right? Like, maybe I'm just conditioned to have a kind of, like a nostalgic response to having widgets. Also, I really like the way that window rules are handled. The fact that you can click on this Detect Window Properties button, click on a window, and then get all of the properties for the window. So if you want to go and have a window that spawns right, let's say here, at this side, maybe like this, right? You can then get those properties and exactly use those. There's no like trying to guesstimate the value you want and things like that. It's just like very convenient. Pretty much every system has window rules, right? Like I have window rules over on Neri, but this button is so cool, and I kind of miss it now that I don't have it. Now, this is something which has been adopted by Cosmic, but is something started by KDE, the legacy X11 app support, where you can let X-Wayland applications listen in on your keyboard. You don't have to have the window focused. You can just let them do their thing. So if you're using something like OBS, like I'm recording this video with, my global hotkeys will work. I don't have to go and like do something dumb to get them to work. Now, on Neri, I found a workaround for this. I used the WebSock and I use a Stream Deck, so it's not a big deal. This was like the main thing I used it for. But if you want to have something like Discord push-to-talk, things like that, having this as an option is so nice. And I kind of wish everybody just did this. Frankly, I kind of wish there was a good solution in place to deal with global shortcuts, because the portal is still very much a chicken and egg problem. Now, some things I'm a little bit more on the fence on. So, obviously, I've used Windows in the past, I've used macOS in the past, and those are floating environments, so I can work with a floating environment if I really need to. But being on a tiler for so long, I do just prefer the tiling model, right? Like, not having to arrange windows and size them like this. I can just spawn them, and they're automatically where I want them to be. If they're not where I want them to be, I just arrange the layout in a slightly different way. There's no worrying about the sizing. However, there are some things that did make KDE quite a bit more tolerable than I otherwise would have expected. The fact that there are hotkeys for snapping into different positions, honestly, for the most part, does the job for me. It's not perfect. It doesn't exactly emulate tiling, but like, it's good enough. One thing that I do really wish is in their tiling, it's more like a window zone thing. I wish this system integrated with the hotkeys. And the reason why it doesn't is this system is a lot more new. And I've raised the issue before. I've spoken to Nate about it, and he agrees that, yeah, I think it was Nate, maybe it was Nico, one of them, agrees that, yeah, it probably would be a good idea to at least have the option of letting these systems work together, because it seems really weird and disjointed that they don't. Now, something which did feel really weird to me is going from Hyperland to KDE. Hyperland is an environment where you will hear about an update being worked on, and then a couple of days later, it's just going to be available in a release. KDE, on the other hand, you can watch the issue tracker, you can watch things being resolved, but being a much larger suite and requiring a lot more testing, you might hear about something and then not actually see it available on your desktop for a couple of months. So it's this very different kind of pace for adding new features. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, I wouldn't want KDE to operate at the pace that Hyperland especially was operating in the early days of the project. But it is weird that, you know, you have a problem, and you know the problem's been resolved, and unless you want to, you know, run the Git version, you kind of just have to wait for a really long time for that problem to actually make it into the binary in your distro. Again, it's not necessarily bad that that's the case, but it is a different thing to get used to. And I guess it does sort of encourage you to find workarounds to problems, as long as it's not like, you know, your system hard crashing, which I didn't really have when I was using KDE outside of like the Monster Hunter Wilds thing. But I don't know, it's something I got used to, but not something necessarily I would want to stick on forever. I do like that fast-paced model you see on tilers. Now, there are some things which I really didn't and still don't like. One of those is the handling of virtual monitors, as in KDE doesn't support virtual monitors, it has virtual workspaces. So if I go to workspace 2, it changes on every single one of my monitors, rather than the way a tiler does it, which is only the monitor I'm currently on changes to the second workspace. This caused a problem for me, because I like having my OBS over here, I like having my video notes, and then sometimes I just want to swap this one here, but those also swap on the other screens as well. I found ways to work around this. I just make them sticky windows, and it mostly deals with it. It's annoying though. I don't want to have to deal with it. And honestly, going back to a tiler and not having to deal with this problem, which has, I believe, been opened in KDE since like KDE 3, is very nice. Also, whilst I talked about a lot of settings being available in the KDE settings, are you aware that there is a CLI tool for controlling your windowing, for controlling Plasma, and you can do a lot of things with it? I think you can do basically as much as you can do in something like i3 and Neri. The problem is no one ever talks about it, and from what I can tell, it doesn't seem to be that well documented, and finding the documentation in the first place can be a nightmare. Once you find it though, and once you can work out how to use it, it unlocks a lot of functionality for scripting KDE, which I don't think a lot of people even know exists. Now, of course, there were bugs along the way. One of them you may recall because I made a very big deal about it because there was no reason for it to be like this. There was a drive caching issue where the entire system would lock up if you were using a mechanical hard drive. Yes, my home is on a mechanical hard drive. Get over it. I temporarily resolved this by just moving the cache over to an SSD. This bug made the environment basically unusable until it actually got resolved. So what was happening is a lot of the effects that were being used were being cached, but they weren't actually using the cache. It was actually rewriting the effects constantly, just smashing the drive. I don't even know why they were being cached, right? Nothing was being cached. It was just saving them to save them. And this broke everything that used any animation in Plasma. I didn't get, like, that was the one time where I thought Plasma actually is this really buggy mess. I don't know why anyone uses it. Once that was resolved, everything was good. Another thing which is still a problem in many ways to this day, it's been slowly getting resolved, is since Plasma does allow for that minimal installation, I found it very annoying how nothing complains about missing dependencies. Oftentimes, things would just silently fail, which in my opinion shouldn't be happening. If you're going to allow for a minimal installation, you need to make it so when there are errors the user can see so they know what they need to address. You don't necessarily need to list out exact package versions, but list out the file that it's looking for that is missing. List out the library name that it's trying to find so the user has something they could go off of. This isn't really a problem in GNOME because, again, GNOME bundles everything together, and a minimal GNOME installation isn't really a thing unless you go out of your way to do so. Now, it's only really relevant if you're switching between environments, but I was, and KDE was handling hotkeys in, frankly, a kind of insane way, where every single hotkey was being turned into a desktop file. Now, that's fine if you want to just make desktop files, whatever. The main problem is the way they were being named. So it would take the command being run and use the first word of the command. The first word of the command is often the same name as the desktop file for the actual application. So it wasn't just making them, it was also putting them into the location for local overrides. This meant that if you went over to something like Cosmic and you tried to add that application into your bar, it would try to run the command because that's what the local override is as an application. And in some cases, that works fine. In other ones where you have something like my notes here in VimWiki, it created the situation where every time I opened Alacrity in that environment, it tried to open my VimWiki. So overall, I liked my experience on KDE. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't have used it for a year or so. At the same time, though, I am not a desktop environment person, right? Like, even though I can use one, I end up basically just using it like a window manager and piecing things together anyway. A window manager for me just makes a lot more sense. If you like a desktop environment, hey, that's awesome. Keep doing it, keep using it. And yeah, if you've not tried out KDE, you know, in the past couple of years, I don't mean go and try out an old version. I mean, try out a new version on something like Fedora, Arch, something like that actually has up-to-date packages, and see if you like it. If you do like the experience, hey, use it. If you don't like the experience, move on and try something different. But for now, I'm going to go back to Neri and enjoy my scrolling tiling window manager. Maybe we're back in KDE at some point. I'm going to keep an eye on it. If something cool happens, hey, maybe I'll talk about it. So, let me know your thoughts. Do you like KDE? KDE. Do you like a tailor? Do you like GNOME or Cosmic or something else out there? Let me know your thoughts down below. And if you like the video, go subscribe and like the video. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribe, Silly Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I really want to scratch my nose right now.